Hello everyone. Today's video is going to be a story that I've pulled together with facts about the Stayner brothers, Steven Stayner and Cary Stainer. The Stayner brothers' story begins in the town of Merced, California. Merced is the county seat of Merced County, located in the San Joaquin Valley of California. Merced is about 110 miles southeast of San Francisco and 310 miles northwest of Los Angeles. It is often called the gateway to Yosemite. Yosemite National Park is about 70 miles to the northeast of Merced. The economy of Merced has traditionally relied upon agribusiness and Castle Air Force Base, which opened in 1941 and closed in 1995. The top 5 agricultural products of Merced are milk, almonds, chickens, cattle, and sweet potatoes. Delbert and Cary Stainer were married in July of 1960. The couple moved to Merced, where Delbert worked as a mechanic for the California Canners and Grower Association. In 1961, Cary and Delbert welcomed their first child, a son they named Cary. In 1963, they welcomed their first daughter, Cindy. In 1965, their family grew again with the arrival of a second son, Steven. A second daughter was born in 1967, and they named her Jody. And a year later, they had their last child, a daughter they named Corey. The 7-member Stayner family appeared to be a typical family living a good, wholesome life with nothing disturbing going on in their peaceful rural town until December 4th, 1972. On that day, Kenneth Parnell and his friend Irvin Murphy shattered the entire town's sense of safety. Kenneth Parnell and Irvin Murphy were co-workers at the Yosemite Lodge, which was located about 2 hours away from the Stayner home in Merced. Parnell and Murphy drove to Merced in Parnell's vehicle. They were hunting. It was a wintry day, a bit cold, and it was sleeting out. 7-year-old Steven Stayner was walking home from school alone. He got out at a different time than his siblings. The two men spotted Steven and coaxed him into the car. Kenneth Parnell decided to keep Steven. He convinced him that his parents had let Parnell adopt him because they could not afford to keep all 5 kids. He told Steven that his new name was Dennis Parnell. 7 years went by, and Kenneth decided he needed another young boy. He tried to get Steven to help him lure one. Steven would not and could not do it. Parnell ended up hiring someone to help him steal Timothy White, age 5, on Valentine's Day. Steven did not like what was happening to Timothy, and he also began to realize that he had probably been lied to about his own parents as well. Steven didn't want Timothy to suffer the same fate that he had, and he wanted to return him to his family. 16 days later, on March 1st, 1980, Steven saw his chance to rescue Timothy White and get him back home to his parents. While Kenneth Parnell was away at his night security job, Steven and Timothy left and hitchhiked into the nearest town 40 miles away. Steven took Timothy to the police station and sent him in to ask for help while he stayed outside. However, the police officers had spotted Steven and they detained both boys. The police immediately knew who Timothy was, but they were suspicious of Steven. Steven then told them about how he also had been taken years earlier by the same man who took Timothy. He could not remember exactly who he had been before, so he said to the police, "I think my first name is Steven." This, of course, set off a wave of excitement. By the next day, both boys had been reunited with their families, and Kenneth Parnell had been arrested. The Stayner family was together again, but their lives had been interrupted, and they were never the same again. During the 7 years that Steven was missing, he was not the only one who was traumatized. He lived a nightmare, but so did his family. His dad no longer was strong and stoic. He would frequently break into tears. The Stayner parents had spent years where only one of them would leave the house at a time in case Steven returned while they were out. Steven's mother coped by trying not to show any emotion so she would not fall apart or appear crazy. The Stayner children also were all affected by this trauma and stress on their family as well. Cary had felt neglected and resentful ever since Steven went missing. Both of his parents were emotionally drained and hurting, trying to cope. Besides that, Cary was sort of an outcast at school, carrying the stigma of being the kid whose brother was taken. When Cary was 3, he was diagnosed with an obsessive-compulsive hair-pulling disorder. He always wore a hat in school because the condition became much worse after Steven was taken. When Steven returned, Cary was very resentful of the attention he was receiving from everyone. He also disliked having to share his room, which had been his alone for 7 years. Now he had to share it with a 6-foot-tall stranger. Cary was an 18-year-old senior, and Steven was a 14-year-old freshman. That first year Steven was back was rough for everyone. Cary was trying to adjust to having a brother again. He was resentful and jealous of Steven. Meanwhile, Steven was trying to get used to being a part of the family and dealing with bullying at school, as everyone was aware of what had happened to him. The whole family would have benefited from counseling, but there was a stigma back then. They toughed it out. Steven himself did receive some counseling through the state when he was first returned. His father soon convinced him that he did not need it, though. As the years went by, the Stayner brothers could not have been more different. Cary was unable to have meaningful relationships with women. He was a bit withdrawn and preferred to keep the upper hand in socializations. He did have relations with women, just not relationships. Steven married young. He and his wife Jody had 2 children. A baby girl named Ashley was born a year into their marriage, and a little boy named Steven Jr. was born the year after that. Tragically, in 1989, Steven was killed by a hit-and-run driver when he was just 24 years old, leaving behind his wife and 2 toddler children. She had stayed stoic during the 7 years that Steven was missing, but now his mother Kay broke, and Delbert became the strong one. More than 500 people were on hand when Steven was laid to rest. Timothy White, who had maintained his friendship with Steven, was a pallbearer. In 1990, Cary Stainer was living with his uncle, Jesse Stayner. On December 26, 1990, an unknown person shot Jesse in the chest with his own gun in his own home during his lunch hour. The vehicle he had driven to the house was missing. Cary was questioned about it, and he stated that when he was an 11-year-old boy, his uncle was inappropriate with him. He was 11 the year that Steven was taken. The murder of Jesse Stayner is still unsolved. In 1991, Cary began a series of nervous breakdowns. In 1995, he was admitted to a mental institution after an episode. He was released after receiving some treatment. In 1997, Cary began working as a handyman at the Cedar Lodge Motel in El Portal, California. He lived at the lodge. If Merced is the gateway to Yosemite, El Portal is the threshold. It is just a few miles from the park entrance. Cary was a skilled jack-of-all-trades, and he became a well-liked employee. On February 12, 1999, Carol Sund, her daughter Julie Sund, and Julie's friend, 16-year-old Silvina Peloso, who was visiting from Argentina, left Eureka, California, where the Sunds lived, and started on a girls' trip vacation. They flew to San Francisco, where 42-year-old Carol rented a 1999 Pontiac Grand Prix. They stayed in Stockton long enough for 15-year-old Julie to participate in a cheerleading contest. On February 14th, the group arrived at the Cedar Lodge in El Portal early in the day. They had reservations for a room for 3. The next day, February 15th, the group enjoyed the park. They returned and had dinner at the Cedar Lodge restaurant. Their room was in the far west wing of the hotel. They strolled back to their room, where they planned to watch some movies that they had rented from the lodge's service desk. This was the last documented sighting of the group. On February 17th, Carol and the girls were reported missing when they did not appear at a prearranged pickup location. Carol's wallet, driver's license, and credit cards were found on February 19th off a highway in Modesto, which is a 2-hour drive from the Cedar Lodge Motel where she and the girls were last seen. A month later, on March 19th, a hiker found a car that had been torched. The car was about 100 yards off the highway and was near Long Barn, California, which is about 95 miles from the Cedar Lodge Motel in El Portal. When police looked inside the trunk of the car, they discovered Carol and Sylvina disposed of inside. The FBI received an anonymous letter that week. It contained a hand-drawn map and the message, "We had fun with this one." The map led the investigators to the site where Julie had been disposed of, about 40 miles from where the burned-out car was found. Investigators went back to the last known location of Carol and the girls. They interviewed the employees of the Cedar Lodge Motel. Cary still did not say or do anything that made him seem suspect. 4 months later, on July 22nd, 1999, a well-being check was requested for Joy Armstrong. She was a naturalist who ran educational programs for kids at Yosemite. She had not showed up at a friend's house when she was expected to, and no one could get a hold of her. Searchers quickly noticed her vehicle still at her cabin, partially packed for a trip. There were signs of a struggle and plenty of physical evidence left behind. It did not take long to discover where Joy had been disposed of. She had put up quite a fight. Tire tracks, footprints, and a description of a vehicle seen in the area made it easy to identify Cary Stainer as the suspect in this crime. A bolo, "Be on the Lookout," was published, and people who recognized Cary called in his location. He was the only clothed person at the clothing-optional Laguna del Sol colony. When taken in, Cary confessed everything in the Joy Armstrong case. It was a crime of opportunity. He had seen her loading her car on July 21st, and he noticed that no one else was around. He had not expected her to put up such a fight. Then, he surprised the agents by confessing to everything in the Carol, Julie, and Sylvina case. He had gone to their room around 11 p.m., claiming that he needed to make a repair. He also stated that they were a crime of opportunity. He had been intending to target a single woman that he had been seeing and her 2 young daughters, but the girls were away visiting their grandparents. After making his full and detail-filled confessions, Cary Stainer pled not guilty by reason of insanity on August 6, 1999. He underwent a full psychiatric evaluation. He has a family history of mental illness and crimes against children. Cary admitted to having fantasies of capturing or hurting girls since he was around the age of 7. He enjoyed exhibitionism, and he also liked watching girls changing without their knowledge. He has always had strong feelings of rejection, and he compensated by creating a fantasy where he had complete control over others. Cary has been diagnosed with mental illness, but he is not insane. He was convicted on all counts in 1999. He is currently in San Quentin, and he will not leave there in his lifetime. This story would have had a very different outcome if early intervention and mental health services had been utilized by the family even before Steven was taken. The cycle can be broken. Thank you for watching Another Day in the Car with JuleZ. Economy of Merced has who was visiting from about 40 miles from where the she had been claiming that he needed